kind of achievement and epic struggle these people here before you participated in helping to stop the road from Fresno to Mammoth. In addition to celebrating the stopping the road, we're also in the midst of the Wilderness Act celebration. The Wilderness Act was signed 50 years ago in 1964, and that actually was the tool of law to protect the few last remaining wilderness areas in the U.S., of which the beautiful Central Sierra is part of them. And additionally, we realized, as Jack was writing this book too, it's also the 30th anniversary of closing the gap of the John Muir Strip of wilderness and the Ansel Adams Wilderness that permanently closed the gap that the major interstate freeway would have gone through, forever destroying the beauty of the Central Sierra. Just kind of a little tidbits of kind of thinking about the big picture of the story. I remember in the early 1980s, I came to the Eastern Sierra on a geology field trip, and I heard a little bit about this road struggle and halting the highway, but that was just about it. It was like, oh yeah, it's a done deal. It was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize quite the magnitude. And then when I started working at the Motor Basin Scenic Area Visitor Center in the 1990s, I started hearing a little bit more from Jim Parker, who lived in Motor City where I live. And Debbie Parker is like, wow, they took me to Meadow Vista Overlook, and they said, this would have been really different if this road had come through. And I'm like, wow, I wonder what happened. And then when I started working at Devil's Postpile National Monument in the early 2000s, a tall man walked in and goes, do you know about the story about stopping the road and the interstate that almost went through Devil's Postpile? And I'm like, just a little bit. And Jack left me this pile of papers of things he had typed up, and I put it in my pile of things to read, and I was reading it one winter and going, wow, there's a really incredible story here. And then subsequently, I had heard that Lou and Mary Rozier were very involved, and I started pestering them at Mule Days, going to their booths and saying, what happened? And they started telling me the story, and it's just really an epic story and struggle of good people caring deeply about the land, getting together to stop a major threat. So that's why we're here tonight, to celebrate the people who've worked so hard to protect this part of the Central Sierra and Devil's Postpile and Red's Meadow and the Middle Fork of the San Joaquin. So, as I mentioned, this kind of fits in with the bigger picture of celebrating the accomplishments of the people, the beauty of the place we live, but kind of take a little quick look about the results of their work. What has been accomplished has both been for the benefit of the town of Mammoth Lakes and also for Devil's Postpile. And so often I hear, town of Mammoth Lakes could have just been a pit stop on the on the interstate, instead of the destination that it is today. And certainly if an interstate goes roaring through your town, you're going to lose a lot of your community character. So by stopping the road, help to keep Mammoth a destination and keep that character in the community. For Devil's Postpile, I didn't quite realize how threatening it was until Lou told me one day that by building that road, they would have to blow up tremendous amounts of rock to make the road, and probably the results of those blasts could have broken the post piles and shattered them and made a big pile of talus at the bottom, so even the post piles were threatened. In addition to that, it would have really changed the human footprint to be just gigantic on the landscape. And we do have a poster back there next to the petitions, posters, and committees that helped to stop the road of what the Park Service would have looked like if the road had come through. So as I was going through some historic documents, I went, oh my gosh, a 5,000 square foot visitor center and condos for the employees and multi-story maintenance buildings. So the Park Service, although they didn't engage in the battle, which was really pretty shocking when I found out that part of the history, but at that point, Devil's Postpile was a very remote National Park Service unit. There wasn't a lot of money or funds or staff available to do too much about it, so we were just kind of a passive victim of this proposal. But we did know something was coming, so some planners did envision what would be needed if we became an exit on the interstate. So fortunately, this struggle also helped to bring Devil's Postpile into recognition that we are part of the National Park Service and we need to be paid attention to, because if you don't pay attention, you never know what's going to happen to you. So it did help the monument to become engaged in regionally what's going on. It also helped us to, because of that road being stopped, to keep the rustic charm that we have down there today. And what so many people really value at Devil's Postpile, many of our visitors, this is their very first experience of being on the edge of the wilderness. We often call it the threshold wilderness experience, because they walk along the river. Many of these people, they ride the bus down. They've hardly ever been separated from their car and their bike. It's a big trauma. What if they forgot something, and then they get off, and then they have to walk 4 miles to go to Postpile and Remo Falls, and then maybe come out at Residential Resort and get that milkshake that we tell them about. And but they're scared, but they still want to experience it, but then they have a really positive experience walking along that trail and seeing people enjoying it. So it's really their introduction to the wilderness, and that's a very valuable thing that we contribute, in addition to being this portal to the greater wilderness. So without further ado, I really want to thank Jack for immortalizing the story now in the book Stuck in the Road that has really brought so many people together to record the importance of this struggle and the great people who persevered against the odds, and then also to hear their first-hand accounts.
Thank you, Dion. Well, first, know that the research I did for this book was facilitated by the fact that I had at least a dozen, maybe a little over a dozen, on-the-scene observers, actual people who did the work to fight the road. I call them the road warriors. Obviously, the people on the other side were fighting too. I could have called them road warriors, but I actually called them the road activists. And our gang were the road warriors. And we have 3 of them here tonight. And I want to introduce you to Jean Tanner, and Lou, and Mary Roser. And each of them are going to have some brief stories to tell about different phases of the battle. Now, there was talk of a road across the Sierra at this level for the past century. And in fact, in a way, you could go back to the 1870s when this was a gold mining district and there was a primitive pack trail across the Sierra at this level, nicknamed the old French Trail. Or you could go back to when natives were crossing back and forth to trade goods. The railroad surveyed for a route that it never went anywhere. Fast forward to after World War II, when this nation was in an economic growth spurt, and then really there was more and more talk about it. And the people on the western side really, really wanted their road. And it was fought over the span of 23 years in 3 phases. And I want to give you that quick overview. The first phase was fought at the state level because you couldn't put a highway through federal land into any kind of development phase without making it a part of the state highway grid, because federal governments do not maintain or plow roads. They only provide money to build them. Well, that battle was fought at the state level, and it was won. The prospective route was never put into the state grid. The second level was fought federally and remarkably involved the executive branch and the White House. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And the third and last phase, which is a little bit beyond the scope of tonight's discussion, was the next 12 years that led to the California Wilderness Act that Deanna just mentioned. And that was what eliminated the corridor that had been saved between 2 wilderness areas. And once that was obliterated, then the road was no longer feasible. So there's the story in 3 phases. Now let's begin with you, Mary. What are you doing in Mammoth in the mid-1960s? What was your reason to be here? Lou is going to be passing the microphone back and forth.
We have a very large microphone here. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
We had the Mammoth Lakes Pack outfit up in the Lakes Basin, which we had purchased in 1960. And we were very busy with pack trips and trail rides and day rides. And we also had 4 children that we were raising at the pack station. We loved it. We enjoyed the whole area. And we just loved our lives. We thought we were very privileged to be doing what we were, where we were. Pack Station, which now is owned by our son and daughter-in-law. And we also worked at Rainbow Pack Station out of Bishop Creek. And so we had developed an interest in this whole greater Sierra area. And we had the privilege of meeting Jenny Smith, who was then Jenny Schumacher, in 1953 when we first worked at McGee Creek Pack Station. And we've been close friends ever since.
Now, the two of you and several others in the community were involved with something called the Mono County Resources Committee. What on earth does that title refer to? What does that mean?
This was our committee that we formed. It was just a little local grassroots organization of people who had businesses in Mammoth Lakes. And we saw the road as being a huge threat to us. And in the middle 60s, I think we formed the committee in about 1964. And it was after we heard that the state was coming out with their Highway 280, or was it 290, or 260? That was what they were calling it. They published their book, or their manual, that showed exactly what they planned to do and where it was going to be, and it was hugely extensive. And we became more alarmed than we previously had. We had been involved in 1958-59 with a small petition drive, which was mostly residents and visitors to Mammoth, protesting the road, because at that time they were talking about the road being a continuation of 203, which would go past Horseshoe Lake and continue on. And we were thinking, oh, that's just horrible. So a few of us got together and decided, well, let's do another petition drive. That was what we were thinking we'd start with. But then we realized that no, that it needed to go beyond that, that the petition was one thing, but we needed to be a little bit more proactive. So we didn't want to name our committee as being something that would alarm other people, like save the whatever. So we thought, well, we are a resource for the county, and the county has lots of resources. So why don't we call ourselves the Mono County Resources Committee, which is what we did. And our mission was to talk to all the business people in Mammoth Lakes and other residents who were interested, and apprise them of what was going on, what was in this report, and what they could expect, and that if we wanted to stop anything happening, that we needed to do it now. We couldn't wait until sometime in the future. So we organized, and we were all friends, so it was easy to get together, and we just started in a small way, but just kept plugging forward. And the person who kept us in coordination with Judge Sherwin, who we also were good friends with, was Jenny Smith. And she was really you might say, the glue that kept all of us together and kept us, we knew what was happening beyond the town of Mammoth. Well, the town wasn't a town then, beyond Mammoth Lakes, and what was happening in the capital. So she was our real focus.
You stumped me there for a moment. I didn't know they signed a tentative number, but I think you were referring to what was the Bureau of Public Roads feasibility study. And the feasibility study really energized Jenny. That was when she said everybody started writing letters.
Yes.
She also caused a stir in the Bureau of Public Roads office because the first letter she asked you to write was to ask for copies of the report.
Yes.
And it overwhelmed the mimeograph machine entirely for that federal agency.
Yes.
Well, now pass the microphone to Lou. We'll fast forward a couple of years. The Highway Department and the State Highway Department has now done their study, which shows that it's just an overwhelming challenge to put a road over 9,000-foot passes. And there's a hearing in Sacramento. And you, I believe, were involved in an excursion to that hearing. Tell us what happened.
Well, there was Tip Van Patten provided his two-wheel drive old Ford station wagon, 57 station wagon. And he and his wife, and Doug Kittredge and myself, climbed in the back and headed for Sacramento for the estate assembly hearing. And this was the middle of April, virtually springtime in the Sierras. But out of nowhere came a big snowstorm. And the snow wasn't leaving when we left Meadow, or it wasn't falling when we left Meadow. Mary said it came in shortly afterwards. But by the time we got to the Carson Valley, on 395, it was just a whiteout blizzard. I couldn't hardly see. And by the time we decided that instead of going over Highway 50, since it's snowing in the mountains, we better take 80 because they would certainly keep that open. And we were concerned about them closing Highway 50. Well, by the time we got up to the top of Donner Pass, near the top of Donner Pass, the highway department had closed I-80, and this is in the middle of the night, and line up with cars, and they were turning around going back, Meadow or someplace. Anyway, I got out of the car in the snowstorm and walked up to the fellow stopped in traffic and said, we've got a state assembly hearing tomorrow morning in Sacramento. We're planning on building another one of these highways across the Sierra like this. And they can't keep this highway open. How do they expect to keep another highway open? I said, you need to let us go on over and take our chances. And somehow I convinced him I had the right mind to let a vehicle go through like that. But so we hopped back in the old station wagon and took off. The last words he said, when you get stuck, don't expect any help. You're there. So we go into that storm over Donner Pass, and it was just soft snow just been dumped. And I swear it was 3 foot deep. And the snow was coming over the grill of the station wagon, and it was blocking the headlights to where we couldn't see. So every so often we had to jump out, pull over, jump out, pull the snow away from the headlights and go a little further. And it's a wonder we didn't get stuck in the process. But we made it across, pulled into Mary's sister's and the brother-in-law's home in Sacramento. Laid our sleeping bags on the floor for the night. And the next morning, I put it down to the state offices at the assembly building. And
Well, only Eastern Sierrans could pull off a masterful feat like that. Now, when you got to the Capitol, and I understand from my research, you guys all got there very early, you were very intent, and you were knocking on doors of assemblymen, and what did you find out? Were these guys really up on this topic?
what was amazing to us, it just kind of blew us away, is that, I forget, was there 11 or 12 people on that assembly committee that were voting, but not a single one of them had read the state highway. That really the road, said it was way too expensive for the amount of cars that they would be traveling on it. It would cost $125 million, I believe, if I'm remembering right. It would take 1/3 of the state of California's snow removal budget for each year to keep that road open because it was so much higher, deeper snow in the Meadow area. And the highway department themselves didn't want to build it. They had thumbs down. But these committee members, there was so much political pressure that, and developers and what have you, Jared Restaurant, that they indicated, when we talked to them, when we first started talking, before we pulled up the state highway report, we had aware of facts and figures, they were prepared to vote for it. After we got through opening their eyes to
was AB 290 in 1967, but the people on the east, the western side didn't get the message. They put in AB 1191 the next year. They went a second round, but the road was vetoed. It was not put into the state system. So that was the victory for phase one. Phase two involved some complicated political maneuvering. Ike Livermore, who was the Natural Resources Secretary under Governor Reagan and a champion of the Sierra since the 1930s, realized that he wasn't getting anywhere at local and regional levels. And since the White House was filled with California Republicans at that moment, he decided to appeal to the White House. Some things happened in the White House that were going to be announced not far from a place that you were responsible for called Meadow Pack Station. Where were you when you heard that Governor Reagan was going to visit your pack station?
Well, I was in Bariloche, Argentina skiing. So I flew home a little early. Our daughter Suzanne was training in a ski race camp there, and I had gone with her. Then I had heard from Bob Tanner that I was needed to come home, so I flew home, and that's how I first learned about it. I wasn't close to it like Lou and Mary because Reds Meadows in Madera County, which is, we were kind of distant from Mammoth, what was going on, so we appreciate all your efforts.
No, but you were ready right there early the morning of his arrival, which was June 28th, 1972. So what was the scene like at the pack station before you arrived?
We had very competent packers who brought stock, including Lou and Mary, and some of the other pack stations, plus our own at Reds Meadow. It was not mass chaos. It was quite orderly and quite exciting. I had mainly come home because I thought perhaps Nancy would come along with Ronnie, but she didn't. So I thought, well, I'll just ride in too. Why not? I love to ride.
Who came along with the governor? What was part of his detail?
Well, there were Secret Service men. Maybe they weren't so secret, but they said, I heard them talking, they said, let's just fan out into the woods. And I thought, I wonder what they're worried about. Are they worried about bears? Are they worried about bucks? Are they worried about the Boy Scouts? So I said, you know, our horses, all of these animals are trained to stay single file on the trail, and I think it would be rather difficult to get them off the trail. So they democratically rode along single file with the rest of us.
They came around to your way of thinking.
They did.
All right. Now, how long a ride is that up there, Jean? About 3 hours or so?
What would you say, Lou?
That's what I can remember, but Molly tells us a lot better.
3 hours. And Lou, tell us about the destination. Where was this gathering to be?
Well, we gathered at Summit Meadows on the crest, and tied up the horses, surrounded a little meadow up there, and they packed an easel that they set up for Rodrigo to on a chalkboard demonstrate the pointer just where the Trans-Sierra Highway was going to be crossing the Sierra. People gathered around, and Ronald Reagan started in to his talk, and he pointed out the route of the Trans-Sierra and how it would bisect the John Muir Trail through the heart of the Sierra. And he then reached in his jeans pocket, the front pocket, and fished around and pulled out a crumpled up telegram, and which he good news for us today. Just before I left Sacramento and flew over, I received this telegram from President Nixon. And he read the telegram. President Nixon is pulling the funding for this highway and stopping this highway, this desecration of the wilderness area. And furthermore, this highway will never be built. And of course, I don't know if everybody cheered, but there was a big sigh of relief.
Well, some of the people there were at least 75, were immediately pleased and happy. There were some people that were quite stunned, however. Everybody knew that Reagan and Livermore were against any development of that road down into the valley, but they never dreamed that money that was already allocated to improve the road would be rescinded. And in fact, this was a precedent setting. Here was a president who reversed the decision of 3 of his own cabinet secretaries, Interior, Agriculture, and Transportation. I'm not so sure that's ever happened again. Instead, they fire cabinet secretaries. They don't just rescind their decision. So this was really the end of the second phase of the battle. And that simply meant that not only were state funds not going to be applied to highway development, but federal funds were not going to be applied to any improvement whatsoever. That eliminated even the prospect of an Interstate 70. The reason that Interstate 70 extension from Utah across Nevada and right through here was a prospect was that the Interstate Act provided for a $9-to-1 match. That's an incredible amount of money, and that's why the people over in Madera and Fresno counties were pushing for the interstate. The third battle was one that took 12 years, and that was leading to the California Wilderness Act, Deanna. That California Wilderness Act had a lot more impact on the area than just eliminating the corridor, didn't it?
Yes. It had a really fantastic impact for what we're able to enjoy today, because in addition to the road corridor and closing that gap forever, it also expanded the wilderness area. So when you're out at Minaret Vista today and you look out at the vast watershed of the Middle Fork, it's just all wild and beautiful, and it's the headwaters of the San Joaquin, and so it's the whole landscape that's now protected to a large degree, and is really one of the most, I think, scenic views in the Sierra, and also a really important area for wildlife. You know, we have the lowest passes in the Sierra here at Minaret Vista and Mammoth Pass, and it's a really important migratory corridor for deer and all kinds of birds, and it's been a long history of human migrations too across those passes. So we've really preserved a lot of our natural and cultural heritage.